short class or thin class today. Um,
Low in number.
yeah, lower in number. So anyhow, so Job 9, picking up where we left off. Of course, we didn't meet last week, but uh, the last time we did meet, why Bildad had confronted Job. Again, these three friends. Initially, I believe after reading the accounts, the three friends came to Job to be an encouragement and a help, but with a mixture of bad theology and impatience, they kind of turned and are pointing their finger at Job because he's got sin in his life, according to them. Now, again, I want to remind us because um, we would tend to forget, but God had said that Job was righteous and that he eschewed evil. So we know that God did not send this on Job as a retribution for sin in his life. Now, I keep saying all that because from Job's point of view, he does not know that. He does not know that the way we know that God thinks of Job. So we need to always have this in our mind as we study these chapters to understand that Job doesn't see it the way we can see it because of what God has told us through His Scripture. Okay. Now Job chapter 9, especially. Well, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but as we get through this, Job asks the question in verse 2 that is very important. And I'm going to stop and we'll elaborate on that after we read this. But understand now, Job's in chapter 9, Job is replying to what Bildad had said, which was essentially, you got to get right with God. And again, that's what Eliphaz had said, and as we're going to find out, that's what his other friend Zophar is going to. Is that Zophar? Yeah, Zophar is going to say the same thing. All three of his friends are saying, Job, you're in sin. That's why you're in trouble with God. But now, chapter 9 and chapter 10 is Job's reply to Bildad, and then chapter 11 we'll get to, and that will be Zophar and his first confrontation with Job. So anyway, understand that Job has lost all of his family, and he's lost his health, he's lost his appetite, he's lost his ability to rest or to sleep. He's at his wit's end. He does get close to cursing God a few times, with this woe is me, but we know that he didn't ever curse God because Scripture tells us he didn't. So with that being said, let's start. I'm going to let this read a few verses, but I want us to key in on what Job asks here in verse 2. Job chapter 9, verse 1.
Job 9. Then Job answered and said, I know it is so of a truth, and be just with God. If he will contend with him, he cannot answer him one of 1,000. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who hath hardened himself against him, and hath prospered? Which removeth the mountains, and they know not? Which overturneth them in his anger? Which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble? Which commandeth the sun, and it riseth not, and sealeth up the stars? Which alone spreadeth out the heavens, and treadeth upon the waves of the sea? Which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south? Which doeth great things past finding out, yea, and wonders without number?
So Job is talking about God through all these, but notice what he says here in verse 2, and I just perfectly timed it to where I turned the volume up as verse 2 is being read. How should a man be just with God? Now, the answer to that, obviously, is Jesus Christ. Now, Job will say in Job chapter 9, well, let's just turn to Job chapter 19, look at verse 25. Job 19:25, Job says, For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. So, even though in Job's anguish here in chapter 9, and he asks, how can a man be just in front of God? Job does have the presence of mind later on in these conversations to admit that he does know that his Redeemer lives. Now, he may not have known exactly how Jesus Christ was going to come and how he was going to live, but he did know that God was going to send a Redeemer at some point in the future. And according to Job 19:25, he even knew at this point, perhaps some 1,500 years prior to Christ's coming, he knew that there was a Redeemer alive that was going to come and make him just before God. Now, with that being said, let's go to Romans chapter 3. Don't do a whole lot of turning, but I wanted to point these out because this question in Job 9:2 is a very deep question. And if we don't spend time looking at it, we may just gloss over it. But I want us to understand what Job is asking here. Romans 3:26. Now this is talking about Christ. If we read the preceding verses, 3:26 says, to declare, I say at this time, his righteousness, talking about Christ, that he might be the just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. So the answer to the question that Job asked in Job 9:2, how can a man be just with God? Through Jesus Christ. That's the only answer. No, our works can't do it. We all are very familiar with that. It's only through Jesus Christ and what he has done that makes us just in front of God. Now, I won't need to read that. So anyway, now going back to Job 9, Job asked the question in verse 2, how shall a man be just with God? And then he goes through and he talks about the power that God has. Look at verse look at verse 3. Talking about if a man would contend with him, who could answer? You can't answer it. When you stand before God, you're not going to have an answer for anything. You're going to be in awe. I mean, you're not going to be able to say anything. God, talking about God in verse 4, he is wise in heart. He is mighty in strength. He removes mountains, verse 5. He shakes the earth out of her place. The pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it rises not, and he seals up the stars. He alone spreads out the heaven, verse 8. He treads upon the waves of the sea. See how great God is? How can mere man stand and be just in front of God? And that's what Job's point here is what is man? I'm just, and as he'll say here later on, I think in verse, that's in chapter 10, he's going to say, I'm just clay, or I'm just curd in making cheese, or I'm just a garment that a weaver makes. Man is nothing compared to God. Now, we are made in God's image. I don't want to downplay that thought, but understand, God created us from dust. And Scripture's clear that we'll return to dust. Our bodies will anyway. So, but Job here is just, what am I? Well, I'm just nothing compared to God. Going now to, where did I leave off, Star? 11. Okay, verse 11.
Lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, but I perceive him not. Behold, he taketh away. Who can hinder him? Who will say unto him, what doest thou? If God will not withdraw his anger, the proud helpers do stoop under him. How much less shall I answer him, and choose out my words to reason with him?
So, in verse 14, Job says, I don't even know what I would say if I was to confront God. But again, understand that Job is thinking that perhaps his friends are right, and perhaps there is some secret sin in Job's life that he is not aware about. And so that's why all this calamity has come upon me. Perhaps his friends are getting to Job to think that, boy, I failed in some way. And as we will see, Job says, regardless of whether I'm perfect or whether I sin, God's going to deal with me regardless. We'll see that later. But understand Job's thoughts here is, I'm just in God's hands, and he's going to do with me what he wants. And that's true. He does with us what he wants. We may not like it. We may not like what we have to go through. But we understand that Job went through this for an example for us, because here we are some 4,000 years later talking about it. Verse 15.
Whom, though I were righteous, yet would I not answer, but I would make supplication to my judge. If I had called, and he had answered me, yet would I not believe that he had hearkened unto my voice.
Do we get to feel that way sometimes? If we call out to God, what does it say there? And he had answered me, I would believe not. I wouldn't believe it if God did answer me. That's Job's attitude here in verse 16. Have we ever felt that way? There's no need of me praying because God ain't going to hear me. And if he does, I wouldn't believe it. Y'all look at me like I'm weird. Nobody else has thought that before? Oh, okay. Thanks, Mike. We get so distant from the Lord perhaps at times where we think there's no need for me to even pray because God's not going to hear me, and if he does, I'm not going to believe that it's him anyway. And this was Job's Job's attitude. Now, I'm not saying that this was right for Job to think this way, but I want us to understand that even through all this anguish that Job has, God was faithful to him. And God blessed him in the end. And Job is going to understand that through all this, God was with him even through this, even though it feels like God has forsaken him. Verse 17, moving right along.
For he breaketh me with a tempest, and multiplieth my wounds without cause. He will not suffer me to take my breath, but filleth me with bitterness. If I speak of strength, lo, he is strong. And if of judgment, who shall set me a time to plead? If I justify myself, mine own mouth shall condemn me. If I say I am perfect, it shall also prove me perverse.
Job here is saying that even if I do admit that generally speaking I'm without sin, well then that's a confession of guilt because I do have sin. So Job's feeling like no matter what I do, it's not going to be the right thing. Again, not necessarily the correct way to think, but in his anguish, he's crying out, and this is what he's feeling. And we've all perhaps at times felt like no matter what we do, it's wrong. But understand, for those of us that belong to Christ, he's faithful. And even in our lowest points, he'll bring us up out of the miry clay. And regardless, we all have this woe is me at times. I kind of wonder sometimes if I've been like Job, where I've been woe is me, like woe is me. I don't know. But understand, through all this, no matter what we read, God was faithful to Job. God never turned on Job. But he says there, verse 20, if I justify myself, then I'm condemning myself because I know I have sinned. And we all can admit, yes, we have sin in our lives. There are things in our lives that aren't pleasing to God. And this is what Job says. I can't justify myself. He's going to deal with me. Verse 22.
Though I were perfect,
verse 21.
Would I not know my soul? I would despise my life. This is one thing, therefore I said it. He destroyeth the perfect and the wicked. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Now my days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good. They are passed away as the swift ships, as the eagle that hasteth to the prey. If I say, I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness, and comfort myself. I am afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. If I be wicked, why then labor I in vain? If I wash myself with snow water, and make my hands never so clean, yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me.
Job's now thinking, why am I even trying to live a righteous life? Why am I trying to serve this God? He's going to judge me, whether I'm innocent or wicked, verse 22. He's going to destroy me. Notice that this is deep anguish that Job is expressing here. And he says, you're not going to hold me, verse 28, you're not going to hold me innocent. If I be wicked, then why do I labor in vain? Why do I sacrifice? Why do I pray? Have we ever thought that sometimes? Why, God? I do all these things. But again, it's not what we do. It's what Christ has done. But here, at these points, Job is offering up what he's been doing to show that he's righteous. And it's not our deeds that make us righteous to begin with. But this is what Job is feeling. He says, if I wash myself, I make my hands clean, you're just going to throw me in a ditch and I'm going to be dirty anyway. That's basically what verse 31 says. Job doesn't know what to do. But, as we will see here, well, we're not there yet, but in chapter 10, Job begins to talk to God, and he kind of has a change of attitude here. But we'll get to that. I'm jumping ahead. I don't know why I'm doing that. Verse 32.
For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us, that might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. Then would I speak, and not fear him. But it is not so with me.
Deep anguish here. One thing I read this week, and I don't think it really ever occurred to me, but through all this, that Job never asked God to heal him, which would have been perhaps one of the first requests that I think I would have made. But, earlier on, and we're going to see this later, but early on, Job was wishing that he hadn't even been born, or that he would have died after he was born, so that he wouldn't be going through all this. At times, he acted like he was just going to kill himself, although he never does, understand. But at no time did Job call out for God to heal him. And it makes me kind of wonder why that was. But anyway, comments or questions on chapter 9. That went a little quicker than I thought it would.
Jim, I'm really surprised at the shape that Job was in, that he could talk so much.
Well, that's funny you say that, because in chapter 11, when Zophar starts to talk, he's going to mention how much talking Job does. But it is funny, because when I read chapter 11, I thought, yeah, he does talk awful lot to be in such misery. But, sometimes when you're sick, you don't want to say anything. But that did stick out to me even in the study, and how much talking Job's doing. But apparently God didn't take his voice. He took everything else but left his voice. I don't know. But good catch there. But we'll see that in chapter 11 when Zophar answers. He points that out, that, you're talking an awful lot. Anybody else? Where my wife went.
I don't know. Ask see if everything was okay upstairs. I don't know.
Oh, well. Hayes probably wants his mom. Anyway.
What a baby.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started. All right. Chapter 10. That actually, like I said, chapter 9 went a little quicker than I thought. So let's do chapter 10 now. This is continuing on. This is Job talking, although it does seem in chapter 10 he does begin to perhaps talk more to God than he does to Bildad. But nevertheless, it's the same story, a different chapter, Yeah, well, and again, they're all three there. And in some ways, we read the last time we met, I want to say last week, but the week before, that Job was thinking that even though these guys were taking turns basically talking, that the silence of the two that not talking was showing their agreement with what the one speaking. So perhaps in some ways, while it does say that he's talking to Bildad, perhaps in a broader sense, he's talking to all three of them, because in some ways they're all telling Job the same thing, that you're going through this because you have sin in your life that you've not told anybody about. You've not confessed it. You're harboring sin. And so Job does begin to think, well, maybe I do. Who knows? But we all understand that the accusation that Job's friends had was not accurate. And that's why I say Job's friends meant well, but they didn't do him any favors. They didn't comfort him. They tried to help, but they weren't helping at all. But I guess I don't know. Maybe it's better than being alone, but then I'm thinking, boy, with friends like that, why don't you just go home? Yeah. Anyway. All right. Chapter 11 or chapter 10.
Job 10. My soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me.
So we notice here, all this time, Job says, there's nothing I can say to God. I'm in his hands. Whether I'm guilty or whether I'm innocent, he's going to destroy me. But now, in verse 2 here, I will say to God, do not condemn me. So he's making a plea here. And he asks God, show me where you contend with me. Show me my sin. Show me why this has happened. Now, it will take some time, but God will show Job why he went through this. But understand, we know the whole story, and Job doesn't. He's living it. And again, we know that Job was innocent. Job was righteous. because God told us that in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. But here we see a change in Job where he's now saying, I'm going to ask God why he condemns me, why he's doing this. And again, he's not going to get the answer really quick, but he is finally at least asking the correct question here. Verse 3.
Is it good unto thee that thou shouldst oppress, that thou shouldst despise the work of thine hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked?
Is it good that you oppress me? Romans 8:28. For we know that all things work together for them that love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. So we know that whatever Job's going through is for his benefit, and for us in 2026, our benefit as well. Because what Job went through, we can learn from that. So it is good that he was oppressed. It's good that you're oppressed, although we may not agree with it, we may not like it. Verse 4.
Hast thou eyes of flesh, or seest thou as man seeth? Are thy days the days of man? Are thy years as man's days, that thou inquirest after mine iniquity, and searchest after my sin? Thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thine hand. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me into dust again? Hast thou not poured me out as milk, and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit.
So I hope we can see this change of attitude in Job, where he is now giving glory to God, that he was fashioned in God's with God's hands. He was made out of clay. Now he does ask there, are you going to turn me to dust? Which we all go to dust eventually. Your bodies will go to dust. I saw a video this week. I don't know what it was. They opened up this grave, this what do they call the
Tomb?
Yeah, no, the vault. They opened the vault, and it was full of water. And my thought was, and I think the comment in the video was, I thought that's why you buy a vault, to keep the water out. Of course, I guess if you buy a cheap one, perhaps, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, this one was, I don't know how old it was. I don't even know what I was watching. I don't know how I came upon it. But anyway, why did I bring that up? Yeah.
Dust?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So even if you put yourself in a vault, those things are going to leak eventually. Apparently, I don't know how that one was. And no matter what kind of stuff they're going to pump in you to keep you preserved, you're going to turn to dust eventually. I don't know how. Tammy, of course, she likes these, the shows where the wife kills the husband and vice versa. Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
There's an expert.
Yeah. Well, he does. He knows a lot of stuff about stuff, if he can remember it. Anyway, but they exhumed this body from, I think it was 1985.
A long time ago.
But now that body apparently was enough to do whatever. You have to ask. Of course, Tammy probably don't remember either, because she watches so many of them that I don't think she can keep them apart. Just understand that almost all the time that somebody dies, it's because of the husband or the wife. And they're going to find you out. Everyone. And you can tell within the first 5 minutes that it was the spouse. Because you can't fake sadness. And so all these people, they get caught and they're like, I can't believe she's dead. Well, you're the one that did it. You're faking anyway. How did I get off on all that?
Dust.
Turn into dust.
Still trying to figure out the dust part.
Anyway.
Water, dust, mud.
Well, it'd be mud. Okay. Anyway. I don't even know where I left off now. How did I get off on all that?
Most of the dust in the household is skin.
Did we read verse 12? Yeah. Thou hast granted me life and favor. You visit and preserve my spirit. Job understands that he's in God's hand. You're the one that granted me life. You're the reason I was born. And he goes on there and he talks about how he was formed out of clay. He's curdled out like, or poured out like milk and curdled like cheese. In other words, just this process of making these things. You clothed me with skin and flesh, and you've fenced me with bones and sinews. That's your tendons and your ligaments and stuff. You've given me what I've got. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. Understand that even in all of Job's anguish, he's not given up. We may have thought so at times, but he didn't give up. And those of us that truly are saved, that truly belong to Christ, no matter how low we get, we don't give up. We persevere. There are many that started and didn't finish well. But here we see Job hanging on to whatever little hope he has. You're the one that preserves my spirit. Verse 13.
And these things hast thou hid in thine heart. I know that this is with thee. If I sin, then thou markest me, and thou wilt not acquit me from mine iniquity. If I be wicked, woe unto me. And if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I am full of confusion, therefore see thou mine affliction, for it increaseth. Thou huntest me as a fierce lion, and again thou showest thyself marvelous upon me. Thou renewest thy witnesses against me, and increasest thine indignation upon me. Changes and war are against me. Wherefore then hast thou brought me forth out of the womb? Oh, that I had given up the ghost, and no eye had seen me.
So he goes from this anguish to praise to God, and now back to anguish. And I wish I had been born, or that I would have just died, and no one would have ever saw me. Woe is me. Woe is me. But again, go back to what he says in verse 12. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my soul. Woe is me, but thank you, Lord. Kind of what Job's saying here. And we could be like that at times. Again, I'm not saying that we're always down in the pit, but we're not always up on the mountain either. The Christian life is up and down. Hopefully the older you get, maybe it steadies out a little bit. I don't know. But nevertheless, I'm just saying that Job was praising the Lord in verse 12. Now he's wishing he had never been born, or that he died after he was born, here in verse 18. Verse 19.
I should have been as though I had not been. I should have been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Cease then, and let me alone, that I may take comfort a little before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death. A land of darkness is darkness itself, and of the shadow of death, without any order, and where the light is, as darkness.
If I was just dead and in the grave, I wouldn't have these problems. Again, we see Job going back and forth. Back and forth. Understand how it all ends, how the Lord blesses, how the Lord was faithful, how the Lord kept Job through it all, even though there was times when Job was shaking his fist at God, asking him why he was ever born. Comments on chapter 10? Alexa's still here? Okay. Really? Oh. Oh, you're not? What are you doing? Doodling? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Verse 11. This is Zophar, Job's third friend that's going to comment. Zophar is going to be like the other two, Bildad and Eliphaz, in the fact that he's going to point to Job and say, you're the problem, Job. And again, none of the players in this know the unseen realm of which God and Satan are working to prove Job's faithfulness to God. None of these four men know what's going on in the unseen world. And so they're dealing with things that are eternal in a temporal world. They're seeing things through their own eyes instead of through the eyes of God. Now again, perhaps we would probably do that as well, in the fact that we can only know what we know and what we see. But I think in some ways, perhaps we are more sophisticated in our knowledge of God. We have a complete scripture for us to understand the purposes of God, whereas in their time they didn't have. And so perhaps in some ways we do have more enlightenment on what God does through his workings, so that we would understand that, yes, perhaps maybe we're going through something because we're in sin. Perhaps we're going through something just because God's trying to prove something to us, or we're going through something because God's trying to prove something to others through us. We don't know. But perhaps we do have more insight into what God's doing because we have the full Scripture for us to understand. All right? So this is Zophar. Zophar so far has not spoke. See what I did there? Verse 1 of chapter
Job
11.
11. Then answered Zophar, the Naamathite, and said, Should not the multitude of words be answered? And should a man full of talk be justified?
There you go, Kay. You know, all these words, you're just talking. Verse 3.
Should thy lies make men hold their peace? And when thou mockest, shall no man make thee ashamed? For thou hast said, My doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thine eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips against thee.
See what Zophar's saying here? Job, you said in verse 3 there, or verse 4, your doctrine is pure, and you're clean. That's what you've said. But verse 5, oh, but if God could speak and open his lips against you, oh, if we could hear what God says about you, we would know the truth, Job. And we know that the reason you're suffering all these things is because God is mad at you. Boy, some pow. Now, I suppose that would be good counsel if, in fact, Zophar knew that Job had sin in his life. All three of them are doing is assuming that the reason Job's going through this is because of sin. And that's not always the best way to handle situations. Verse 6.
That he would show thee the secrets of wisdom, that they are double to that which is. Know therefore that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth.
Yeah, God's only given you less than what you actually deserve, Job. You have so much sin in your life. Just think if God would give you what you deserve. Now, on that, we can say, thank God that we don't get what we deserve. Thank you for his mercy. But Zophar is saying, you ought to be lucky he's not dealing with you the way he should. Job. Mercy. Verse 7.
Canst thou by searching find out God? Canst thou find out the Almighty unto perfection? It is as high as heaven. What canst thou do? Deeper than hell. What canst thou know? The measure thereof is longer than the earth, and broader than the sea. If he cut off, and shut up, or gather together, then who can hinder him? For he knoweth vain men. He seeth wickedness also. Will he not then consider it?
Now Zophar is speaking the truth here, in that God does seize the wicked. He does know vain men. I mean, nothing's hid from God. But Zophar's purpose in saying all this is to point his finger at Job, not to give some type of right doctrine. You know, he's pointing his finger at Job through all this. Verse 13, 12, verse 12.
For vain man would be wise, though man be born like a wild ass's coat. If thou prepare thine heart and stretch out thine hands toward him, if iniquity be in thine hand, put it far away, and let not wickedness dwell in thy tabernacles.
Now again, here in verse 14, he is correct again. If sin does dwell with you, put it far away. Get it out of your house. Get rid of it. So this is right doctrine, but not in the proper context. But understand that we need to put sin far from us. Verse 15.
Then shalt thou lift up thy face without spot. Yea, thou shalt be steadfast, and shalt not fear, because thou shalt forget thy misery, and remember it as waters that pass away. And thine age shall be clearer than the noonday. Thou shalt shine forth, thou shalt be as the morning, and thou shalt be secure, because there is hope. Yea, thou shalt dig about thee, and thou shalt take thy rest in safety.
So Zophar says, if you would get rid of this sin, Job, then you're going to be like, what's it say there? You're going to be secure in your hope. You're going to be rest and safety. You're going to be clearer than the noonday. You're going to shine forth like the morning. All of these metaphors, if you just get rid of your sin, Job. Now again, proper doctrine, but not in this context. All right? We would all do well to put away our sin. And these blessings would come to us. But again, Zophar is saying this with his finger pointed to Job, that the reason you're this way is because you've got sin in your life. I keep saying the same thing over and over again because that's what his three friends keep saying. And in some way, Job keeps saying the same thing over and over again. So we really haven't covered any new territory here, even though we've covered 3 chapters. But you understand the plight that Job has and the help that his 3 friends think they're given. Verse 18 or 19, and we'll be finished here in a couple.
Also thou shalt lie down, and none shall make thee afraid. Yea, many shall make suit unto thee. The eyes of the wicked shall fail, and they shall not escape, and their hope shall be as the giving up of the ghost.
All right. That's 3 chapters. Yes.